On to the last but not least presentation for today by Rachel Milio, RT1, doctoral candidate titled Unnamed Women, Prosopography, Attic Law and Annotation.
All right. Hi, my name is Rachel Milio. Like Maria said, that's my title. I'm the PhD candidate for RT1, which is Semantic Annotation of Texts. And today I'm going to be talking about, in my overarching PhD, of creating a database and a knowledge graph to study the corpus of Attic law, how I am dealing with the multitude of unnamed women that appear in these texts, and also how all of this can come together, why this problem even exists. So we're going to start with the problem. Why are there so many unnamed women in Attic oratory? Next, I'm going to discuss other prosopographies. So how have other scholars approached prosopography, one of classical Athens and one of women? And lastly, potential solutions. How can we annotate and disambiguate unnamed women? First, I'm just going to start with a quick little introduction to prosopography because I know it's kind of a mouthful. So this one definition by Dogan and Lebaron, they consider prosopography a means to provide answers to research questions regarding large quantities of social actors, et cetera, et cetera. It's a collection of people within a domain. So quite often that's a time range, a place range, other constraints to sort of narrow the social group that you're studying. So the idea is when you have a large collection of people studied all together, you can notice trends that you don't always notice when you study individuals. So firstly, the problem of unnamed women in Attic oratory. I want to start by clarifying that there's a difference between oratory and the classical Athenian legal system. So the general consensus, which has been pointed out by scholars such as Kaparis, is that women had more access to the Athenian legal system than previously assumed. And this assumption comes from oratory, which are the speeches that would be presented before the law courts. And in the law courts, a woman had to be represented by her guardian, quite often husband, immediate family member. And so these women were not speaking for themselves within the law court. But we do know from other sources, or even from oratory, that women would have access to earlier steps in the legal process. So appearing before magistrates to get a divorce in classical Athens, a woman would have to approach the appropriate magistrate and essentially file for divorce. So the absence of women is not in the legal system, it's just in the texts themselves, which is why it's so important to then notice where they actually are and shed light on how much agency they did or didn't. And then this problem of unnamed women comes from a deliberate avoidance of women's names on the part of the orators. So to demonstrate this, I've got a little sample text both in the ancient Greek and in the English. So we have, this is an inheritance dispute. So they're talking about a man, Aristarchus, who married the daughter, and then the daughter had 4 children, 2 of whom are these also unnamed women. So you can see this structure of, instead of giving the name of any of these people, or any of these women at least, they are pointed out in relation to male relatives. And this can get kind of confusing in a text when the relations get more and more convoluted, which they often do in inheritance disputes. But so you can see how this problem comes to be, because we don't want to publicly say the names of the women. So instead, they abstract, they convolute, and you get these strange mentions of the daughter of so-and-so who had my mother and another daughter. But in oratory, we also often have these unnamed women who then have agency or even speak or like have a voice within the narrative of the oratory. So Michael Gagarin wrote an article in which he pulls out 9 examples in which women are given dialogue within speeches and oratory. I've given these 4 examples. So the first, the daughter of Diogeton, we have this woman who gives a speech about this inheritance dispute in which money is being withheld by her father towards her and her children. And she gives this long speech contained within a speech that was then delivered by a man. But we don't know her name, but we hear a lot about her. We hear her voice. In Lysias 1, we hear the voice of this also unnamed old woman who exposes like an extramarital affair. In Demosthenes 47, the plaintiff's wife, who's also unnamed, actually intervenes to prevent people from stealing her property. And lastly, in Antiphon 1, we have this unnamed stepmother who's actually on trial for murder. So we have all of these women who are notable, who participate within the narrative, who have agency, but we don't have any names for them, which is a problem. So not only do these women have a presence, they have agency even without names. So using traditional, or not traditional, but methods, standard methods like named entity recognition would erase the presence of these women who actually play a large role within the text. So now I wanted to look at two examples of prosopographies. The first is persons of ancient Athens, and the second is one that I learned about recently, Femme Iber. So persons of ancient Athens is a long ongoing prosopography. It began in 1901 as Prosopographia Attica, created by Johannes Kirchner. So this was to collect all the known people from inscriptions and the Greek literary corpus. In the following years, Benjamin D. Merritt took over and updated it as more inscriptions were discovered, as the archaeological excavations in Athens progressed. And these were stored in files on index cards, basically. And when you had to update one, you would have to find the card, you would have to, rewrite it or add to it. And it was kind of a mess. It wasn't very easy to share the information. You couldn't really publish it because, you'd find a new inscription every month or so, and then you'd have a new person to add to the records. If someone had like a published volume, it would become obsolete really quickly. So in 1972, which is very, very, very early for computerization, John Trail had the idea to store this index card system in a computer system. And it hasn't progressed that much since then. Currently, it's in the form known as an Empress embedded database, which is a relational database. And these are some examples of what an entry in POAA looks like. So this first one is a woman with an unknown name, which they do have quite a few of these, but these are being drawn from inscriptions or physical artifacts, rather. So we know that there's a person who is the daughter of another person, and they're indicating that we can't quite read these names. And then the second example is a woman from Portugal, whose name we do know. So we're seeing her name is File, and then she's the wife of et cetera, and here's all the quotes about her and a little description of why she's in this oratory to begin with. It's another inheritance dispute. So you can see from this that POAA actually only includes unnamed women from inscriptions. So for my purposes, because I'm working with texts, it's not the most helpful, but it does demonstrate an example of how this information can be presented. Which brings us to the second one, which is a prosopography of women in Castilla, which is a medieval Spanish text. So this is from an article called Women to the Forefront, a case for digital medieval prosopography. And this is based on the data design in this project aimed for a balance between approaches of large-scale projects and the particularities of gender, whether they come from the historiographical or cultural perspective. And some of the challenges that the author brought up that she faced in creating her prosopography is that the source material, the Crónica de Castilla, is inaccurate or inconsistent. There's a few manuscripts that kind of differ, and then the source material will give women different names, or different lineages at different points of the chronicle. So sometimes a woman will be cited as the daughter of this person, and sometimes she'll be cited as the wife of that same person, and it's just these weird discrepancies. Which is why in creating this, she uses the factoid prosopography, which points to this is a factoid, not necessarily fact, asserted about this person at this section of the text. And then also not every woman that's mentioned has all the desired information that they wanted to capture. So they have to be flexible in developing the prosopography. So they work with two different kind of starting as tables and then moving into the factoid prosopography. So people, and so there's one person entry for each person, and that has things like person ID, standard name, wiki data if it exists, and then cases, and cases are those factoids. That's a mention of a person in the text. And so those will contain more information. So things like religion, if that can be determined, partnership, physical violence, if the reference has any, is in relation to physical violence against the woman, they also want to mention that. So you can see they're trying to capture a lot of information about these women and tying it directly to the mention in the text where they are deriving that information. And there are quite a few unnamed women within the Chronica. So you can see they use patronyms, toponyms, and if they're royalty, regnal numbers to disambiguate these people. And they will assign Arabic numbers according to the order of entries. This example is Anonyma 2. This is the second anonymous woman they have from the Chronica. And you can see they disambiguate her by saying she's the daughter of this guy and she's linked to a different person, and then no recorded names for her. But you can see the quote, and then this section down here is the case, the part in red. So that's when she's mentioned and the information they're able to pull from that. So the key takeaways I got from reading this article and reading about this prosopography is that sometimes when you're doing work like this, manual is better. I'm working with pretty unreliable texts as well, and mentions of unnamed women, especially with convoluted relations, require human interpretation. And then also that for me, for building my ontology, familial relations are essential to incorporate because quite often this is the only way we know that a woman exists or how to identify her. Unfortunately, I would love to be able to center the women without their relations to men, but there's no way to do it with the texts. Okay, so finally, potential solutions, how to streamline the identification of unknown women in oratory. Manual is better, but I'm just one person. I'm on a time crunch, so what can I do? So currently I have this kind of basic Python solution where I search for women words in text. This is not the complete list, but this is a little sample of CSV file with the list of words that could be used to signify women, because we know they'll be mentioned as mother of Demosthenes. If you find all the mentions of different cases of mother, you'll be able to pull those out. So during the annotation transfer / NER that has been developed by Laura Sofiatini for Latin, and then I adapted for ancient Greek, I additionally flagged the use of these words in text, which indicates where I should look to find mentions of women. So you can see, for example, this is Demosthenes 27:4. Down at the bottom, we have a named entity of a person, so a phobos. And then up top, we have this one, Metera, that's been flagged as a woman. Continuing on, we have other named people, men, and at the bottom, the mention of someone's sister. And I can show you then this full excerpt of text with those two words highlighted, and you can see it's talking about Demosthenes, the orator, this big inheritance dispute as well. His father basically willed money to different people. So he gave money to Demosthenes and gave his mother her dowry back. And then because Demosthenes was still a child, entrusted money to two men, Aphobus and Demophon, and they were the nephews of Demosthenes Senior, one via a brother and one through a sister. So we know from that we have this unnamed mother of Demosthenes, which we can then identify because she is given a name elsewhere. And we know she's also the wife of Demosthenes Senior, the father of Demosthenes, which gets confusing. There's a lot of people with really similar names. And the second woman that we were able to find is this unnamed sister of Demosthenes Senior, who is then the mother of Demophon. But what's missing back is there's another sister here, if you can see my pointer. So this is the sister of Demosthenes the orator, not Demosthenes Senior, and she was also supposed to inherit a certain amount of money. And why it's missing, because what's missing is that the current CSV of women words has Ada feeding the accent that way, and this one is with the accent the other way. So just have to go back and add that. But you can see how it works. And then the other option that I've thought of is using the classical languages toolkit parser to identify masculine names in the genitive, which could indicate where to look for possessive structures, so the mother of Demosthenes. But this, from my experiment so far, is not promising because CLTK struggles with names. It can identify a genitive if it's a non-proper noun pretty well, but when it's names, especially names that occur only once or twice through the whole corpus, it doesn't always know. And then also a lot of the times in oratory, you get these first person relations, my mother, my sister, my wife, and then that doesn't really help with finding those. So I think the solution I have now is my best option, but I'm obviously open to suggestions. All right, so here's the bibliography. Thank you.